If you ask any parent about their deepest fear, they will, without a moment's pause, tell you it's the unimaginable loss of their child. This grief is permanent, an ache that never fades, and no parent should ever have to face such an unspeakable tragedy. Tragically, though, life doesn't spare anyone from heartache. Success, fame, or wealth cannot shield a person from death's cruel reach, as it often strikes, taking away the most cherished part of their existence. Today, we'll explore the harrowing stories of celebrities who have endured the unbearable, the loss of their children in devastating circumstances. For most of the world, Mike Tyson is a symbol of unshakable strength, a heavyweight champion who dominated the boxing ring like no other. His fists carried enough power to fell even the fiercest of opponents. But in 2009, Tyson faced an opponent that no parent, no matter how strong, could ever prepare for: the loss of his 4-year-old daughter, Exodus. It was a blow that shattered the toughest man on the planet, leaving him vulnerable and broken in a way no fight ever had. The tragedy unfolded in a moment that seemed impossibly ordinary. Exodus was playing at her home in Phoenix, Arizona, just like any other curious child. Her bright laughter filled the house as she explored her world. But within seconds, that joy turned into unimaginable sorrow. While playing on the treadmill, Exodus accidentally became entangled in a loose cord hanging from the machine. By the time her older brother found her, her neck was caught and she was unresponsive. Chaos erupted as her mother desperately tried to free her and called 911, hoping against hope that it wasn't too late. Tyson, who was in Las Vegas at the time, rushed back home upon hearing the news. Despite all efforts to save her, little Exodus passed away in the hospital, leaving her family in shreds. The pain of that day, of losing the light of his life, is something Tyson has described as a wound that never heals. The usually composed champion couldn't speak about his daughter without tears welling in his eyes. "I was numb," he confessed. "No amount of strength, no punches, nothing could prepare me for this." At one point, Tyson even turned to substances to dull the unbearable pain. He later revealed that he spent days doing cocaine in an attempt to escape his emotions. In one interview, overcome with sorrow, Tyson abruptly ended the session, telling the reporter, "I can't do this. No time is enough time to heal this pain." Tina Turner, a mother's saddest goodbye. Tina Turner spent her life proving that strength could rise from pain. She was a force of nature, a woman who refused to be defined by hardship, fighting her way from an abusive marriage to global superstardom. But for all the battles she won, there was one heartbreak she could never overcome: the loss of her son, Craig Raymond Turner. Craig was Tina's firstborn, the baby she had at just 18 years old, long before she became the queen of rock and roll. He was the quiet one, the sensitive one, the boy who watched and listened more than he spoke. As his mother rose to fame, Craig's life was often caught in the turbulence of her struggles. He saw the bruises, heard the fights, felt the pain that his mother tried so hard to shield him from. But through it all, she loved him fiercely, and he loved her just the same. Even after Tina escaped her abusive marriage and rebuilt her life, Craig remained her anchor. He grew into a man who carried the weight of his past, struggling in ways that were sometimes invisible. And then, in 2018, the unimaginable happened. At the age of 59, Craig took his own life. Tina was in Switzerland when she got the news. The shock, the disbelief, it hit her like a lightning bolt. Her baby was gone. The boy who had held her hand through so many storms was no longer here. "I don't know what pulled him down," she later said, her voice heavy with sorrow, "but I know he is at peace now." The days that followed were a blur of grief. She flew to California, stood by the ocean, and watched as Craig's ashes were scattered into the water. It was his favorite place, a place he had always found peace, and now it was where he would rest forever. For someone who had survived so much, who had faced the worst life had to offer and still found a way to rise, this was a pain even Tina Turner couldn't outrun. But she did what she always did. She kept moving forward, not because the pain faded, but because she knew Craig would want her to. In her later years, Tina has often spoken about finding peace and cherishing the beauty of life despite its hardships. "I know he's in a good place," she shared. "He's at peace now. Marvin Gaye, a father's silent grief. Marvin Gaye wasn't just the king of Motown. He was a man who poured every ounce of his soul into his music, a man whose voice carried the weight of love, passion, and heartache. But beneath the melodies that defined a generation, there was a pain so deep, so unspeakable, that it never left him. The pain of losing his child. In the mid-1960s, Marvin was married to Anna Gordy, the sister of Motown founder Berry Gordy. Their relationship was electric, full of passion, intensity, and turbulence. But through all the ups and downs, one thing remained constant: Marvin's longing to be a father. When Anna became pregnant, it was as if, for the first time, he could see a future free from chaos, a life grounded in something pure. He spoke about it endlessly, his excitement brimming as he imagined the laughter of his child filling their home. But fate can be unbearably cruel. Their baby was born too soon, far too fragile for this world. Marvin held his child, watching helplessly as the life he had dreamed of slipped through his fingers. And then silence. The nursery that was supposed to be filled with lullabies and laughter became a hollow space, a painful reminder of what should have been. Marvin never recovered. The weight of that loss clung to him, suffocating, relentless. He blamed himself, though there was nothing he could have done. The grief wedged itself between him and Anna, turning their love into something distant, strained. They stopped talking about it, as if silence could erase the pain. But grief doesn't disappear, it festers. Marvin carried his sorrow in the only way he knew how, through music. His voice, already smooth and rich with emotion, took on a new depth, a haunting sadness that could be felt in every note. Songs like Distant Lover and Trouble Man weren't just melodies, they were cries from a heart too shattered to speak. Despite the adoration of millions, despite the fame, the wealth, and the accolades, Marvin felt alone. The pain of losing his child never truly left him. In rare moments of vulnerability, he would talk about the fragility of life, how everything could be taken in an instant. "Music is my salvation," he once said. But even music couldn't mend the wound of losing a child. It was a sorrow that followed him, shadowing his every step, echoing in his every lyric. Prince's unspoken tragedy. A loss too deep to heal. For the world, Prince was an untouchable icon, a musical genius who defied convention and reshaped the industry with his artistry. But behind the electric stage presence and otherworldly talent was a man who knew heartbreak more deeply than most would ever imagine. In 1996, Prince and his wife at the time, Maddie Garcia, welcomed their first child, a baby boy. Their little prince, Amir, meaning prince in Arabic, a name that carried the weight of love, legacy, and hope. The couple had dreamed of this moment. Prince had always envisioned himself as a father, believing that his legacy would not only live through his music, but also through his child. But that dream was shattered within days. Amir was born with Pfeiffer syndrome, a rare genetic disorder that prevented his skull from developing properly. Doctors delivered the devastating news that his chances of survival were slim. Prince had always been the man in control, the one who could bend sound, style, and even the industry itself to his will. But here, in this moment, he was powerless. No song, no prayer, no deal he could make with the universe would change what was happening. The house that had been filled with music, laughter, and anticipation turned into a place of silence, of waiting, of praying for a miracle that never came. His relationship with Mate suffered under the weight of their loss. The couple, once inseparable, drifted apart, unable to mend what had been broken. Their marriage dissolved, leaving behind a void that no song could fill. Those close to Prince noted that he never fully recovered from Amir's passing. His silence on the matter was his way of coping, but his music carried the weight of his pain, a testament to the child he lost and the grief he could never truly escape. Maddie later shared the unbearable weight of those final moments, holding their baby's tiny hand, whispering, "Mama's here," as his breath slowed and then stopped. He was gone. Just 6 days in this world, a lifetime of love never fully realized. Eddie Levert's A Father's Pain That Never Fades. For decades, Eddie Levert's voice was a soundtrack to love, loss, and life's deepest emotions. As the lead singer of the OJs, he poured his soul into every lyric, every note, never holding back. But nothing, not fame, not fortune, not even the wisdom gained from years in the industry, could have prepared him for the unimaginable pain of bearing not one, but two of his sons. Gerald and Sean Leverett were more than just his boys. They were his pride, his legacy, his heart walking around outside of his body. Both followed in his footsteps, carving their own places in the music world. Gerald as a celebrated solo artist and member of LSG, and Sean as part of Lever. Eddie had raised them with music, but more than that, he had raised them with love. And then, in the cruelest way possible, life took them both from him. In 2006, Gerald, the golden voice balladeer, was at the height of his career. He had it all: hit songs, adoring fans, and a future that seemed limitless. But at just 40 years old, he was gone. A fatal mix of prescription and over-the-counter medications took his life in his sleep. Eddie got the call that no father should ever receive. His son, his shining star, was gone. The grief was instant, overwhelming. "It felt like my heart had been ripped from my chest," he later said. But grief is cruel, and just when he thought he had faced the worst, another blow came. 2 years later, Sean, his youngest, was serving time for unpaid child support when he fell ill behind bars. He complained of health issues, begged for help, but his cries went unanswered. He collapsed in his cell and never got back up. He was just 39. Another funeral, another son lowered into the ground, another piece of Eddie shattered beyond repair. Losing one child is unbearable. Losing two? It's unthinkable. For Eddie, the music didn't sound the same anymore. The joy he once found in performing now carried the weight of absence. He would later admit that there were nights he didn't think he could go on, that the grief was suffocating. "I was lost," he confessed. "I didn't know how to live without them." But music had always been his salvation, and somehow he found his way back to the stage. Not because the pain faded, but because it was the only way he knew how to keep his sons alive. Every note he sang carried their memory, every lyric a tribute. Bobby Christina, a life lost in the shadow of tragedy. For Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, life was a whirlwind of music, fame, and headlines. Their love was passionate, intense, and at times destructive. But amidst the chaos, there was one thing they both adored beyond measure: their daughter, Bobby Christina Brown. She was their everything, the symbol of their love, the one thing that truly mattered. And yet, fate had a cruel plan in store. Bobby Christina was born into a world of flashing cameras and constant scrutiny. From the moment she arrived, she was her mother's shadow, watching Whitney perform, clinging to her on red carpets, and soaking in every moment of their bond. To the world, Whitney was a legend. But to Bobby Christina, she was simply Mom. And Whitney loved her fiercely. But behind the glamour, their home was often a battleground of addiction and dysfunction. Bobby Christina grew up witnessing the struggles that came with fame, the arguments, the heartbreak, the highs and the devastating lows. Then in 2012, her world came crashing down. Whitney Houston was gone, found lifeless in a hotel bathtub, a victim of addiction's merciless grip. The loss shattered Bobby Christina. She was just 18, barely an adult, yet now completely alone in a world that had always felt too big, too overwhelming. The grief consumed her. She spoke of seeing her mother in dreams, of hearing her voice, of feeling lost without her guidance. In the years that followed, Bobby Christina struggled to find her place. She clung to Nick Gordon, a young man Whitney had taken in and raised alongside her. To the outside world, their relationship was unconventional, even concerning. But to Bobby Christina, he was the only thing that felt familiar, the only person who understood the weight of her sorrow. On January 31st, 2015, tragedy struck again. Bobby Christina was found unconscious in a bathtub, eerily mirroring the way her mother had died 3 years earlier. For 6 long months, she remained in a coma, her family praying for a miracle that never came. On July 26, 2015, Bobby Christina took her last breath. She was only 22. Her death sent shockwaves through the world. People couldn't help but draw the heartbreaking parallels, like mother, like daughter. But this wasn't just another tragic Hollywood story. This was a young woman who had been drowning in grief long before she ever entered that bathtub. Bobby Brown later spoke of the pain that never leaves, of the moments when he still expects to hear her voice. "She was my baby," he said, his voice breaking. "She's always going to be my baby." The Brown and Houston families still struggle to make peace with what happened, with a life that was stolen too soon. John Legend, a melody of love and loss. John Legend has spent his career writing songs that touch the soul. Songs of love, devotion, and heartbreak. His voice carries warmth, his lyrics speak of deep emotion, and his music has soundtracked countless love stories. But behind the ballads and the Grammy-winning melodies, there is one story that was never meant to be written. A story of love so great, it turned into the deepest sorrow. In 2020, John and his wife, Chrissy Teigen, were expecting their third child, a son they named Jack. They had shared their excitement with the world, letting fans into the intimate journey of pregnancy, believing they were once again about to welcome new life into their growing family. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. The complications started early. Chrissy was placed on bed rest, her body struggling to sustain the pregnancy. John was by her side every step of the way, hopeful, praying, holding on to faith that everything would be okay. But as the weeks passed, their worst fears began to unfold. Chrissy was admitted to the hospital, bleeding too much, losing too much. The doctors did all they could, but the heartbreaking reality was undeniable. They were going to lose their baby. John held Chrissy's hand as she sobbed, their world crumbling around them. And then, in one devastating moment, it was over. Jack was born too early, too fragile to survive. He never took a breath, never opened his eyes, never got to feel the warmth of his parents' embrace. But he was here. He was real. He was loved beyond measure. In the aftermath, grief settled into their home like an unwelcome guest. The man who had written the most beautiful love songs of a generation was suddenly lost for words. What melody could capture the pain of losing a child? What lyric could mend a heart so shattered? John, always the one to bring comfort through music, found himself drowning in a silence that even he couldn't fill. But grief, as crushing as it is, does not erase love. It does not silence the songs left unsung. In the days that followed, John sat at the piano and did the only thing he knew how to do. He played. He let his fingers find the words he couldn't say. Let the music carry the weight of the sorrow he didn't know how to express. And from that pain, a new kind of love was born. A love that honored Jack's brief existence. A love that would never fade. Mary J. Blige, a mother's love, a heart forever broken. Mary J. Blige has always been a voice for the broken, the struggling, the ones who have fought battles no one else could see. Her music is raw, her lyrics woven with pain, resilience, and survival. She has sung about heartbreak, addiction, and self-worth. But there is one loss, one pain, that she carries in silence. The loss of a child she never got to raise. Mary's life was never easy. She grew up in the rough streets of Yonkers, New York, witnessing trauma no child should ever see. Her rise to fame was a battle, one she fought with her voice, her grit, and the pain she turned into art. But just as she was learning to reclaim herself, life struck her with a devastating blow. She was expecting a baby, a chance to create the family she never had, to give love in a way she had never received. But fate had other plans. The pregnancy ended in tragedy. The details remain private, spoken only in hushed tones, held close to the heart of a woman who has endured more pain than most. But those who knew her saw the shift, the heartbreak that no song could mend. She never spoke about it openly, but it was there, woven into every lyric of sorrow, every note of longing. Losing a child, especially one you never got to hold, is a grief that doesn't fade. It lingers, it haunts, it reshapes the way you see the world. Mary poured herself into her music, channeling the pain into albums that spoke to millions. But behind the strength, behind the soulful voice that had saved so many, was a woman mourning the life that could have been. She turned to faith, to music, to anything that could help her move forward. And she did. She became the queen of hip-hop soul, a legend, an icon. But some losses never fully heal. Even now when she performs, when she sings about heartache and survival, you can hear it, the ache of a mother who never got to say hello before she had to say goodbye. Marvin Sapp. A father's faith. A loss too heavy to bear. Marvin Sapp has always been a man of faith. His voice, rich with emotion, has lifted millions in worship, offering hope to the brokenhearted, strength to the weary. His songs tell stories of perseverance, of trusting God even in the darkest of times. For all his life, Marvin had believed that faith could carry him through anything. He had seen it heal, restore, redeem. He had sung it into existence, turned it into hymns that wrapped around the brokenhearted. But when he lost his son, his bright, beautiful boy, Marvin's faith was tested in ways he never thought possible. The day it happened, time slowed. The phone rang, and with it came the words no parent should ever have to hear. His body went numb. His hands trembled as he tried to hold on to something, anything, that would keep him from falling apart. He remembered pacing, gasping for breath, willing it not to be true. But there are some things that even faith cannot undo. In the days that followed, grief took over like a storm. The house was too quiet. The absence was suffocating. He would wake up expecting to hear his son's voice, the sound of laughter, the clatter of life moving forward. Instead, there was silence, crushing, endless silence. At night, he would sit alone, staring at the walls, whispering prayers that felt more like pleas. Why God? Why him? Marvin had known loss before. His beloved wife, Melinda, had passed after a harrowing battle with cancer. That pain had nearly broken him, but he had survived. He had found strength in knowing he had to be there for his children. But now the weight of another grave, another goodbye, was unbearable. His congregation looked to him for strength, for guidance, but he had none to give. The man who had spent his life preaching resilience now felt like he was drowning in sorrow. He wanted to scream, to cry, to run from it all. But he couldn't, because grief is relentless. It demands to be felt, to be lived through, no matter how much you want to escape it. For weeks, he couldn't sing. The music, the very thing that had saved him before, felt hollow. The words that once carried power now felt like whispers lost in the wind. But one night, when the ache became unbearable, he sat at his piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. He closed his eyes, and then he sang. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Because music was the only way he knew how to speak the unspeakable. The first notes were shaky, broken. But then, something happened. The melody grew stronger. The pain turned into sound, the sorrow into a song. And for the first time since his world had shattered, Marvin felt something shift. The grief didn't fade. It never would. But in that moment, he realized he wasn't alone in it. His son was still with him, in every lyric, in every breath, in every note that carried his love into the world. Gladys Knight, A Mother's Song of Sorrow. Gladys Knight's voice has always been a beacon of strength and soul, carrying generations through heartbreak, love, and resilience. Behind the glamour, beyond the music, there was a wound that fame couldn't heal, the loss of her son, Jimmy Newman. Jimmy was more than just Gladys's firstborn. He was her heart, her pride, her greatest love. From the moment he came into her world, she poured every ounce of herself into being his mother. He grew up surrounded by music, watching in awe as his mother's voice became the soundtrack of millions of lives. But fame never overshadowed the bond they shared. He was always her baby, no matter how many stages she stood on, no matter how far she traveled. But life has a cruel way of striking where it hurts the most. Jimmy battled addiction for years, a fight that consumed both him and the mother who loved him beyond measure. Gladys watched helplessly as the bright, beautiful boy she had raised slipped further away, caught in a storm she couldn't control. She prayed, she begged, she tried everything to pull him back to the light. But addiction is relentless, and even a mother's love sometimes isn't enough to break its grip. In 1999, the unthinkable happened. Jimmy lost his battle. He was gone. The call came. the kind no parent should ever have to receive. Gladys fell to her knees, unable to breathe, unable to process that the son she had once rocked to sleep, the child whose laughter had filled her home, was never coming back. The world kept turning, the music played on, but for Gladys, time had shattered. The pain was unbearable, an ache that settled in her bones, in the very core of her being. She spoke of him often in the years that followed, honoring his memory in the only way she knew how, through music and faith. She turned to God, finding solace in her spirituality, holding on to the belief that one day she would see her baby again. But the grief never left. It lived in her voice, in the way certain lyrics caught in her throat, in the quiet moments when the lights went down, and she was just a mother missing her son. Richard Pryor. Laughter through the pain. Richard Pryor was a man who turned pain into comedy, a legend who made the world laugh even when his own life was unraveling. His jokes were raw, his stories unfiltered, because he knew that the best comedy often comes from the deepest wounds. But there was one wound that laughter could never heal: the loss of his son, Richard Pryor Jr. Pryor's life was chaos wrapped in genius. Raised in a brothel, abused, abandoned, he carried demons that never truly left him. And yet he rose above, using humor as both a weapon and a shield. But when he became a father, something shifted. He wanted to be more than his past, more than the broken man who drowned his sorrows in drugs and self-destruction. He wanted to be a dad who mattered. But addiction is relentless. No matter how much love he had for his children, it was never quite enough to keep him away from the substances that ruled him. His children saw it all: the highs, the lows, the desperate attempts at redemption followed by heartbreaking relapses. Richard Jr. struggled in his own way, growing up in the shadow of a father whose brilliance was matched only by his self-destruction. Then the tragedy struck. Richard Pryor Jr. lost his life in circumstances that remained shrouded in sorrow, a tragedy that broke the comedian in a way nothing else ever had. The man who could joke about anything, who could turn even his darkest moments into a punchline, fell silent. No amount of humor could lessen the weight of bearing his own child. The loss deepened the cracks that were already there. His health, already failing, deteriorated further. His battle with multiple sclerosis left him physically weak, but it was grief that truly stole his strength. In his later years, he spoke less about the pain, but those who knew him best saw it in his eyes, in the way he would drift into silence, lost in thoughts of what could have been. John Singleton, a father's unfinished story. John Singleton was a visionary, a filmmaker who told the stories that others ignored. He was the mind behind Boys in the Hood, a film that didn't just depict life in South Central. It forced the world to see, to understand, to feel. His movies gave a voice to the unheard, and his legacy was built on capturing the pain, resilience, and beauty of Black life. But behind the accolades and the groundbreaking career, there was another side of John Singleton, one the world rarely saw. The devoted father, the man who loved his children more than any award, and the father who would face the most unimaginable loss. For all his success, John's greatest pride was his family. He adored his children, pouring the same passion into fatherhood that he did into filmmaking. But in 2005, his world came crashing down in a way no script could have prepared him for. He lost his son, Masai Singleton. The details were kept private, held close to the heart of a grieving father, but those who knew him saw the change. The light in his eyes dimmed, the weight of sorrow pressing into his every step. John was a storyteller, but this was a story he never wanted to tell. The pain of bearing his own child was a wound too deep for words, a grief too profound to be captured on film. He withdrew, not from his work, but into it. His films became even more raw, his messages even more urgent, as if trying to make sense of a world that had stolen his child. He rarely spoke about his loss, but it was there, woven into his stories, lingering in the spaces between his words. The pain never left, and in his final years, those closest to him said he carried that loss with him everywhere. Lauryn Hill, a mother's silent grief. Lauryn Hill's voice has always carried the weight of raw emotion, but behind the soulful melodies and poetic lyrics, there is a pain few truly know, a mother's pain. In the midst of fame, when the world saw Lauren as untouchable, as the voice of a generation, she was quietly enduring the deepest heartbreak of her life, the loss of her child. The details remain largely private, buried beneath years of silence. But those close to her speak of a grief so profound, it changed her forever. She had been carrying life within her, waiting for the moment she would hold her baby in her arms, whisper lullabies only she could sing. But that moment never came. In an instant, that love, that future, that heartbeat was taken from her. The world continued moving, but for Lauren, time stopped. The silence in her home was deafening. Where there should have been cries, there was only emptiness. Her retreat from the public eye was not just about industry struggles or artistic battles. It was about survival. She was drowning in sorrow, suffocating in the what-ifs and the unbearable ache of a love that had nowhere to go. Friends recall how she withdrew, how her once fiery spirit dimmed under the weight of loss. Music, her lifelong refuge, became painful. Every note reminded her of what she had lost. The industry labeled her unpredictable, erratic, but they didn't know the truth, how grief had rewired her soul, how she would sit in the dark, whispering to a child that was no longer there, how the stage, once her sanctuary, now felt like a foreign place where she was expected to perform as if her heart wasn't breaking. Tracy Morgan, a father's unbreakable love, a loss that never fades. Tracy Morgan has built a career on making people laugh. His presence is larger than life, his humor unfiltered, his energy infectious. But behind the jokes, behind the unmistakable laughter, there is a man who knows a pain so deep that even comedy can't heal it. A man who carries a grief that never fades, the loss of his baby boy, a tragedy that changed him forever. Long before fame, before Saturday Night Live and 30 Rock, Tracy Morgan was just a young man trying to find his place in the world. He didn't have much, but he had love, and for him that was enough. When he found out he was going to be a father, it felt like his life was finally falling into place. He imagined all the things he would teach his son, all the moments they would share. He had so many dreams, until they were stolen from him in an instant. In 1992, Tracy's world shattered. His infant son was taken from him before he ever had the chance to watch him grow. The details of that loss remain mostly private, a pain too raw to relive in the public eye. But those who knew him saw the devastation in his eyes, the way his spirit dimmed. He was just a young man back then, barely figuring out life himself, and now he had to carry the unbearable weight of bearing his own child. For a long time, Tracy didn't know how to move forward. He was angry at the world, at God, at fate for robbing him of the chance to be the father he had always wanted to be. The grief sat heavy on his chest, suffocating, inescapable. And so, he turned to the only thing he knew: comedy. Laughter became his lifeline. He threw himself into stand-up, into characters, into a world where he could escape, even for a moment, from the reality of his pain. People saw the outrageous humor, the over-the-top personality, but what they didn't see was the sadness beneath the surface. Tracy has often said that the best comedians come from pain, and he knew that truth intimately. As the years passed, he built a career, a legacy. He became a father again, cherishing every moment with his children, never taking a single laugh, a single hug, a single "I love you" for granted. But grief is a shadow. It never leaves. Even as he made the world laugh, there were moments when he would fall silent, lost in thoughts of the son he never got to raise. Then in 2014, tragedy struck again. A devastating car accident nearly took his life. As he lay in a coma, hovering between life and death, he later recalled seeing something, feeling something: his father, his son, the ones he had lost. He woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to honor them, to keep pushing forward. Jamie Foxx, a brother's love, a father's grief. Jamie Foxx has worn many titles: comedian, musician, Oscar-winning actor, but the role that meant the most to him wasn't one the world gave him. It was the one he embraced from the moment his little sister, Deandra Dixon, was born. He wasn't just her big brother, he was her protector, her biggest fan, and in many ways the closest thing to a father she ever had. Deandra wasn't just Jamie's sister, she was his world. Born with Down syndrome, she came into his life and instantly became the heart of their family. Jamie took it upon himself to make sure she always felt loved, cherished, and capable of achieving anything. He guided her, celebrated her, and fiercely defended her, making sure she never felt different, only special. As Jamie's career skyrocketed, he made sure Deandra was always by his side. She wasn't just a part of his life, she was the best part. He proudly took her to red carpets, included her in his biggest moments, and introduced her to the world as the real star of the family. She had a way of stealing the spotlight, not with fame, but with her light. "She's my heart," Jamie would say time and time again, his voice thick with emotion. "She's the true inspiration behind everything I do." But life has a way of rewriting even the most beautiful stories. In October 2020, Jamie faced an unimaginable heartbreak. Deandra was gone. The loss hit him in a way that no script or stage could ever prepare him for. "My heart is shattered into a million pieces," he wrote, because losing Deandra wasn't just losing a sister, it was losing his child, his reason, his anchor. Jamie struggled to find the words, to make sense of a world that no longer had her in it. The laughter that once came so effortlessly now carried the weight of grief. The man who had spent his life making others smile was drowning in sorrow. "She was the dance in my soul," he said, reminiscing about the moments when she would crash his Grammy parties and steal the show, or the countless nights he'd tuck her in, feeling the same pride and love a father has for his daughter. In the months that followed, Jamie spoke of her often, honoring her legacy not just in words but in action. He made sure the world remembered her not for her condition, but for her spirit. "She had so much love to give," he shared. "She taught me more about life than I could ever teach her."